Hi everyone, I'm Mr. Smith, it's Friday, Paraskevia. Today we're looking at the first bruvna in Georgian, Sakhelob-it-i bruvna. The nominative case is the one that allows us to build words, and it also allows us to know where the other cases are going and what the other cases are doing. So, if you're ready, let's go. Let's begin with my Instagram poster, and as you can see here, Sakhelob-it-i, which is the nominative case in Georgian. This is the case that really describes the formation of words and how they land in the dictionary. It is that important. And we're going to be looking at the formation of words in the first part of today's tutorial. The second part is how, knowing that, we use that word thereafter. So there's a twofold importance to the nominative case. Fundamentally, Georgians know how to deconstruct if there was a spelling error or a misinterpretation of information. By using the nominative case, there's always a way back. And then, of course, there's the way forward. It is as important to the use of the language as the letters themselves. The difference between the letters and the nominative case is that the letter, you can see it, whereas the nominative case, sometimes you can't. It is something that makes things visible on your behalf, but itself may not be entirely visible at this stage of our learning, which is what makes it rather challenging. Here we have Ilya Chavchavadze, who you've never met. I'm never going to meet him, but he is invisibly as important as the Sakhelob-it-i bruvna. He's literally everywhere, in the language, in the psyche, in the understanding of modern Georgian identity. This man has streets named after him for a fundamental reason. He's hard-coded into modern Georgian consciousness. Sakhelob-it-i bruvna is how to break that code. And so we're going to learn code breaking using nominative case, so that we can construct new words and understand what the other cases are doing without necessarily obsessing with the case itself. Let's look at how the English language looks at singular nouns and plural nouns. And then, of course, if we reference it in a sentence that is part of a story, or if we simply invoke it and just sort of shout at it, right? It's all about the noun. Wolf, capital W, O-L-F. If I want a plural, add an S. So it becomes wolves. And actually, this is something which we're going to look at in another video, because there are quite a lot of mutations from singular to plural in Georgian, as there are in many languages, but that's not at the core of today's class. We just want to see that the word wolf perhaps has wool as its base in both words, and that we've constructed the plural by adding extra pieces on. And in English, to talk about a wolf and reference it actively in a sentence, we need more. The wolf that I'm thinking of, a wolf that I saw yesterday. We are using the and a. The actual capital letter has now become a small letter, and so it's clearly referenced now in an active sentence. I may have a subject, an object, a verb. It's now referenceable. It's not sleeping like it does here. Capital W-O-L-F, it doesn't really do anything. I have to remember it, but it doesn't really do much. Oh, wolf is when I invoke on that wolf, as if that wolf could talk English. It's sometimes done in poetry. My cup, oh cup. Now my cup cannot reply. I'm just invoking or calling on it as if it were a spirit, you know? So I've used the noun for a one-way dialogue with something that's not going to reply. Of course, in this case with Ilya, I could put an exclamation. Ilya may indeed want to reply, doesn't really matter, but I'm just showing here sort of a spectrum of nouns, plurals, and you can see here we don't really have all the reference points available with a real proper name. That word will become very important. Name. So Georgian nouns, they follow a very strict rule. If the root here, sakhl, does not end in a vowel, then it automatically takes the I. So sakhl is the root, you have to remember it. Sakhli is the nominative declination of that root. we're always declining a root and then doing something with the end product. So sakhli is now a referenceable word. Sakhl is almost a little bit like the word house with a capital H with nothing to do. It sort of hangs there. You've got to know it, but H, capital H-O-U-S-E, does nothing. Sakhl does nothing. Sakhli is now a nominative noun. I can reference it in sentences. It can be the subject of my sentence. It's that much of a transformation. Now, if I look at the plural form, I need my root, sakhl. I'm going to have a plural ending, sakhleb, because it's more than one house. But again, I have to add the nominative ending. So, sakhlebi. It's actually what's happened is that this E has been pushed to the end and I squashed the word eb into it. Now, if I were to talk to my house and be sakhlo, I'm talking at my house. I don't have to be angry with it. It can be, oh, sakhlo. I could be writing a love letter about my house and nostalgic about my house. I'm going to add an O. That's how it's done. So add an I to make it a referenceable part of a sentence where it can be the subject. It's now usable. And add an O if it's not necessarily part of a sentence, but it is the direct thing I'm talking to, almost as if that house can look at me. Okay? And that is indeed the seventh bruvna. We will look at the seventh bruvna in more detail, but comparing the first bruvna with the seventh bruvna, we can see two different functions. Here, the root has got the nominative ending to make it live in a sentence that has a development grammatically. Here, we've got it live in a sentence which just has a meaning and it's one directional. E versus O. Let's look at name. Sakhel, sakheli, nominative referenceable word. Sakhelebi, names. Sakhlo, absolutely consistent. Here we've got cup, a cup, cups. We got sakhli, sakhelebi, sakhelo. Perfectly fine. Now, sakhe already ends in a vowel, so it doesn't need an additional ending. That ending is actually invisible, let's say. It is naturally in the nominative, but we just can't see it. Now, Sakhe-ebi, then, we have to add the same noun. It moves into nominative with the infinitely recognizable I. We cannot expect all nouns in Georgian to end in an I, because a lot of them don't. And when they then end in a vowel, perhaps Sakheo can be Sakhev. It's open to new mutations. So, although the rule is root, nominative ending, root, pluralization, then nominative ending, root, and then vocative ending, it isn't as plain as that. If we are going to return to the English example, did we notice that the F mutated to a V? Did we notice that the S mutated to a Z, turning wolf into wolves? We are comfortable with that using English as a first language, or we're very good at English. And so this is just an introduction really as to how we can build on the nominative. The next slide is going to be what we can do with nominative nouns or plural nouns when we've got them. Indeed, we can look at the name of the case, Sakhelob-it-i, by its root. Sakhel means name. This is the naming. It actually comes from the instrumental case, so it's with the naming process. Let's look at that now. Imagine that the root has become Sakhelob-it. It ends in a T. It needs a nominative I ending. So Sakhelob-it-i is the only case where it's written in the case that it describes. Now that we know what a nominative noun looks like, now we have to think about how do we use it. And we've already been using nominative in other cases. The biggest problem I had was that when I shifted case, that I as the subject were in a different case, because the object that I take changes case too, whether it's in the present or the past. I was never really aware of what case I was in, because in all cases the pronoun is me, and me. And so I never really learned it. It was only when I started to analyze why in some cases he is is, in some cases he is man, in some cases he is mas, that I started to reveal a bit of which case the subject was in, and then which corresponding case should the object be in. Now, the nominative case actually serves to make that autocorrect possible. It's by comparing which one appears, knowing that two cannot exist in the same sentence of these examples that I'm giving today, that you can simply autocorrect it. It takes a lot of skill. I'm almost there. So I'll show you how to get there. Let's look at an example sentence. I am painting a house. It's a type 1 verb. It's transitive. So I'm doing an action on the house. The house is not in the same case. It's dative. Me, nominative. Vocativ, Sachels. Dative, house. It's the receiver of my painting. I am the subject. Im nominative. Now, same verb, but now in the past. Same type of verb, but now the subject is in the ergative tense, which means that the object that was painted, the action didn't change. The end result is actually the same. But the case of the object is now nominative. If the subject is in ergative, then the object must be nominative. That's kind of where the autocorrect should be. Use the S in the present, dative, for a type 1 verb. Use the I in the past for an ergative sentence. The verb that you use must correspond, and that certainly is much more advanced knowledge. But from a basic understanding, nominative, dative, ergative, nominative for this one verb to paint. Now, let's take a look at it here. These are all noun 1. Me, is, Isini, David-i. Here we've got even the name David in its nominative case ending, so now we can use his name. And so here we've got ergative. Man, not is anymore. Mat, not Isini anymore. David ma. All of these say that the subject did the painting. It is the doer. The object, in case the house here, is in the nominative case. It is the receiver of that action. So what I discovered, which was difficult for me, was that in all cases it looked like I was in the same case. I was constructing sentences from a very basic level with I and me, because that was the first person perspective, and it's really where I started learning Georgian. But soon I realized that when I talk about he or she, they have a different one. And I never really knew which case I was in, which meant that I never really knew which case they were in. So a lack of knowledge of cases stalled my understanding of the Georgian language, because in reality, Georgians use Sakhelob-it-i bruvna to autocorrect and to troubleshoot. They know what's coming because of which nominative should be there. It's kind of their way of figuring it out, to decode it. So it should always be nominative, dative for a transitive verb in the present. Ergative, nominative for a transitive verb in the past. If we look now at Ilya, where we began, we can now see that is replies to him. It is when he is in the nominative. Ilya is his name. It ends in a vowel. Man is when he's ergative, when he has done something in the past. Whatever he has done, the direct object of his action will actually be in the nominative now. Iliam, same thing. He is now in the past. His name is being used instead of he. It takes an ending, which is the ergative ending. And then finally, of course, we've got mas. And that is when he is indeed in the dative case. All of them apply to him, but we are very aware, because of the different words, of the different cases he is in as the subject and the protagonist of the action. Whereas when it's me, it's the same word. And that's where I got lost. Now, interestingly enough, type 4 verbs are a little bit different. They don't have that same transitive nature. So if the boy wants water, the boy in this case wanted water, he willingly becomes the object. It's like the water has seduced him, and so he has a feeling for that water, and he is actually technically the object, although he is indeed the subject of the sentence. And so to show that almost willingness, the water is in nominative. Without the water, there would be no want. That's the idea. But without the boy, there wouldn't be any desire. So type 4 verbs reflect that with the dative subject pronoun, here indicated with an S, as it would be if it were in the present of a transitive verb. So here we've got here mat and then mat. Of course, the plural endings for the ergative and the dative are the same, but not for the name. So David would be ergative Davidma, and then Davids, the same as beach. Beaches, no, the root is beach. In the nominative is beachy. But the dative relationship, especially here in the past, beaches, ali, umdoda, shows us that he is actually in the dative and that the object of his desire is now in the nominative. So as we can see here, nominative, nominative, nominative. There's a nominative in each of these examples. And to some extent, when we get better at it, we should be able, like Georgians do, to autocorrect the sentence because of the nominative subject or object, and depending on the verb. It is definitely something that we're going to improve upon. One last push, let's test our knowledge. At the top, we've got one verb, chama, which is to eat, and then katami, which is chicken. So that's the relationship with that noun. The next is going to be qola, which is to have something that's living. And the noun that we're going to use is a dog, zagli. Okay? I want us to listen and see if we can hear the transformations. The verb is also quite helpful, but so are the pronouns. So, me katams vcham. Is katams chams. Beso katams chams. Me katami shepchame. Man katami shepchama. Besom katami shechama. The chicken is gone. Katamo. I'm talking to the chicken. Maybe it lives in my ezo, and I'm like, tzadi, katamo, get out of my way. Move. So that's the vocative 2. Let's look at the other example. Me zagli mqavs. Mas zagli mqavs. Besos zagli mqavs. The dog is alive. Me zagli mqavda. Mas zagli mqavda. Besos zagli mqavda. Had the dog, doesn't have a dog any longer. Maybe it's alive, nobody knows, but it's definitely in the past. Zaglo is the way I might talk to a dog. Neither the chicken or the dog can actually speak to me, making the vocative so much more important. And the content of next week's class, just a hint of what we're going to do. That's it, that's the last slide of today. Next week we're going to be looking at the 7th bruvna, which we touched on in this video in pink, the vocative, which doesn't take that long. And I'm going to be in Svaneti with my friends on a tour in Georgia. So have a nice weekend and I'll see you then. Bye.